Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Invest Africa. I'm Alicia Second. Well, the tourism industry plays a major role in many African economies, with those that have tapped into the sector thriving, and that due to a variety of factors. This week we explore the opportunities and challenges in this sector of Africa's economy.
Africa has been one of the fastest growing tourism regions of the last decade. The right infrastructure, safety and security, as well as effective communication of the continent's attractions, will help the continent to reach its full potential. Tourism revenues are the lifeline of many African countries. For example, 50% of Seychelles' GDP is from tourism, 30% for Cape Verde, 25% in Mauritius and 16% in Gambia. Although these are impressive numbers, Africa's share of global tourism arrivals is relatively small. There were 890 million tourism arrivals in 2011 alone, but only 50 million travelled to Africa. Social and political unrest, coupled with concerns over the safety of Africa's aircraft, has dented the continent's share of international arrivals. In addition, many sub-Saharan airports are small and have very difficulty dealing with large traffic volumes and have to depend on single airlines, which some have no connections to major carriers. A report conducted by the World Bank, the African Travel Association and the New York University called on industry players to look into new ways of managing different types of African tourism by categorizing them into safari travels, nature and culture, in order to tap into tour operators' creativity. With more than 700 mountain gorillas that live in the Virungu Mountains that span Uganda, Rwanda and the DRC, these countries are using what is called nature tourism to attract tourists. The use of technologies such as webcams are used to track gorillas or even adopt a gorilla through social media platforms like Facebook.
The real challenge now is just awareness in the industry of how powerful this can be, how important it is that they use social media in particular to start working with their users, seeing each of their customers as ambassadors. They're going to talk about them in social media and to actually then take that profile they have online and drive that into actual sales.
In 2011, the three countries raked in a total of $225 million from gorilla tourism. This was not only profitable, but also raised awareness for wildlife.
We try and showcase the conservation efforts that we've had in place for a number of years now that have helped to see the gorilla population not get extinct, and that has at the same time got our communities around here to see gorillas not as animals which are enemies, but rather as friends.
Despite the challenges facing the African tourism industry, there are countries moving in the right direction. And although it may take some time until Africa catches up with its European counterparts, it does seem as if the continent is aiming for a bigger slice of the pie. Dumisha Mahayele, Johannesburg.
Joining me in studio this week to take a closer look at the business and investment opportunities across Africa's tourism sector is Michael Tatalias. He's the CEO of the Southern Africa Tourism Services Association. And joining us from our bureau in Lagos is Danny Kuproglu, who's the General Manager at Eco Hotel and Suites. Thanks so much to you both and welcome to the show. Let's get straight into things, Michael, because when it comes to tourism in South Africa, we still don't seem to have the travel and tourism industry being seen as a significant economic sector despite its contribution to the country's fiscus. Why do you think that is, and to what extent are we seeing shifts in perception?
Well, I think this is a business show with business readers watching this, and I think part of the key problem is it's always been a glamorous niche activity that people sort of seen. Some of you own a game lodge or a wine farm, and some of you do in your spare time, not realizing it's actually a massive industry. And part of the perception problem has been that it's very difficult to buy stocks on the JSE and buy into tourism stocks. So you want to try and get into one, you're probably only going to get into something like City Lodge. Everything else is a bit diluted. Soko Sun comes through SA Breweries and various other hotel investment groups. So from a hotel or an investor point of view, you can't buy shares on the JSE as easily. The groups aren't that easy to get hold of. That hasn't helped our reputation. But it's a significant industry and it has played a significant part in the last 3 government plans to create jobs. It's been one of the 6 anchor industries for job creation, is recognized as such, but it creates a lot of small businesses. And that's good for creating jobs, because most of the jobs in the country are created from small businesses. But it doesn't make it easy for people to buy into as a top-down investor rather than someone who's starting a business from the bottom.
And that means that we're not reaching the maximum potential overall, Michael, where investment into the sector is based on the kind of returns that are set to be reaped at the end of the day. What potential are we looking at when it comes to the sector as a revenue earner?
Well, that all depends on the amount of people you can process. The industry can only develop returns on the amount of tourists you can come in to the country or to the region. So you get different types of tourists. You get your domestic tourists, your regional tourists, and your higher spending international flying tourists. The high spending international tourists are the ones who spend the most, but sometimes can have seasonality problems, air access issues, visa issues, and that restricts the growth potential there. Your bigger opportunities are in domestic tourism to fill up the gaps in between. You look at the Durban beachfront, for example, all the hotels do superbly well between November to March, mostly on the back of domestic tourism. So there are ways of looking at it, and each destination around Africa has got to get a blend of international tourists who come in with high spending guests, domestic tourists who are lower spending but bigger numbers, and you have easy access to them and they've got easy access to your destination, and attracting your regional guys as well, people who come in for business or medical tourism or shopping or whatever it is, whatever blend gets them into your country, but to get them to spend one more night or two more nights, some to go to a theatre, do a show, go to a game reserve, in addition to their business trip. That's our challenge as an industry. It can earn significant revenue. We've seen in South Africa the revenue figures do go up quite quickly once the tourists are in and spending. But it's a factor of how long they stay and how much money they've got to spend.
Let's target Nigeria specifically, Danny, and bring you into the conversation at this point. What's the status of the sector in Nigeria right now from your perspective, and what kind of growth are we starting to see filter through on your end?
The growth is a little stagnant, although we have seen some developments in respect to new hotel developments coming, particularly in Lagos, Abuja. However, the sector is stagnant and is not growing as fast as it should.
Mm-hmm. Where you say it's stagnant, that would imply that you've got push and pull factors simultaneously at play. So let's take a look at some of those factors that are working to, to either attract or deter investors. Let's start with the positives. I mean, what's the investment appeal that the Nigerian tourism space is putting on the table right now?
Particularly, I would say in the capital, in Abuja, and also in Lagos, you have the element of the business tourists that are coming to explore business opportunities in Nigeria, and that's what is driving the sector. However, when we're talking about leisure tourism, this is still very infantile in Nigeria, and it doesn't grow as fast as we would like it to grow. We're talking that overall GDP contribution of all hotels and tourism, it goes below 0.5% in 2011. So you understand that the sector is not that buoyant. When you want to see at negative things that are impacting the growth of the sector, you can talk about the usual things I would talk in Nigeria: lack of infrastructural development, expensive cost of capital. We can see at elements of security that are affecting a sector that's particularly vulnerable when it comes to infrastructural development and also to security elements.
Mm-hmm. Of course, we've got Danny there, Michael, highlighting both the pros and the cons that investors are looking at when they look at investing in this space. I mean, when you're looking at the kind of investment we're seeing right now, is it more so from a government perspective that we're seeing tourism investments getting made, or are you seeing the private sector participating as much as they could be?
Well, it's refreshing to hear Danny talking about some of the challenges which sound remarkably similar to ours in different shapes and combinations. But I think what we're seeing from an investment point of view is the investors will only go where conditions are ready for them. So they are going to cherry pick the places they want to go to. But you already heard Danny point out there business tourism, the drive in business tourism. You'd hear everyone around the world talking about this is Africa's century. This is where the new growth is going to be. The growth rates in terms of the general economies in Africa are growing. That means there are businessmen out there trying to do deals. Businessmen need to import stuff, export stuff, manufacture, all those kind of trade deals. To do that, you need people on the ground in the countries doing the deals. Mm-hmm. And that needs places to stay. So where you've got the oil industry, you've got this, you've got that. suddenly, if you're going to have captains of industry coming through to do deals, they need a 5-star hotel to stay in. So someone needs to build a 5-star hotel. Other people come through the companies will be 3 or 4-star. The workers are coming through to run the plants or whatever it is may be. So the growth in business and the growth in export and the GDP growth in Africa is going to be driving hotel investment. And I think we need to look at tourism. It has a number of sides to it. You've got your business and your leisure, and your adventure side, which leads to your leisure. But your business is going to be what's driving the rest of Africa, except for your already acknowledged leisure destinations such as East Africa or Southern Africa, which is all the game reserve driven stuff.
Are we doing enough to carve out these new niches within the tourism sector? I mean, you've highlighted business tourism as one of the niches to be looked at a little bit more closely. I mean, we need to be selling the African tourism story so that it's more than just a safari story, one would assume.
Well, yes, except that the customers want to buy a safari story, so you can see why a lot of the smaller developers will just want to tag on the back of that. But I think with the business tourism, the first thing is to find hotels close to airports that people can get in and out of. That's Danny was talking about the infrastructure challenges in Lagos. I think it's in any city. When you have a traffic jam from the airport to the main part of the city, there's an opportunity for someone to build a hotel right next to the airport so that people from the capital city can drive across for the meetings at the hotel where the people just fly in and out. So there's all sorts of opportunities for higher quality type of hotels, or alternatively, if there's only 1 or 2 dominant ones, the prices are probably too high. So there's a gap in the market there for someone to come in and bring a slightly similar sort of product at a slightly lower price. The more of those sort of hoteliers you bring in, the sort of adds credence to in a developing sort of market inside that country, which has probably had very little tourism. Danny was talking about 0.5% of GDP there. But I think over time, Nigeria is going to be a significant player. I mean, it's catching up to South Africa in terms of total GDP. They're going to need to be significant hotel investments in the country. That will help with the infrastructure. Part of the benefit will be if they improve the highway from the airport to the city, etc., etc. Now, that's not a tourism development, but it is where government has to work with the private sector to attract. There's only a certain amount of business that you can do, or the opportunities you can see before you can start going for the niches. You've got to have a fairly broad investment in infrastructure before other types of tourism can start to develop. You talk about the niche ones. How do you get people to your niche product if they can't fly there, if the airports don't work, if the railways don't work, if the roads don't work? You can't get your tourists to where you potentially could do something different. So again, you're stuck with the mainstream type of thing. So I think in most of the growth you're going to see in Africa at the moment, it's going to be around putting hotels in. But it is exciting because I do see entrepreneurs from Africa. So you see the City Lodge Group, the South Sun, Protea Hotels, those sort of big groups in South Africa now looking to expand, and they're choosing their little places where they're putting their speciality types of hotels. That's a good sign because that indicates to them that the governments in those countries are willing to do a deal. They're making it clear. And I think this is something we learned from the South African experience 15, 20 years ago. The way to make tourism grow is first off, establish the ground rules. Who's responsible for what? What's the property ownership rights? What investment rights have you got as an investor from overseas or locally? Set out the ground rules so everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. Leave the government guys to do the government jobs and the private sector to do the private sector jobs. Work closely together, but don't get involved in each other's cabbage patch. And that's when everyone can focus on the growth. And we've seen it in South Africa in terms of the numbers. It's been spectacular in the last 15 years. What we're needing to see in the rest of Africa is a commonality to this. So you're going to start to see it again. It's not just Kenya growing. Tanzania and Uganda are now doing very well. And Rwanda is now the big story from a leisure niche.
And absolutely, that becomes a strong regional contender within this space as well. Danny, of course, we've had Michael highlighting the fact that infrastructure development is key. Not so long ago, I was chatting to a representative of the Marriott Group of hotels, and they were highlighting that finding prime locations is one of their key challenges. Let's take a look at your expansion strategy over at Eco Hotels specifically, and what kind of investments you're making within the tourism space right now.
At Eco Hotel, currently we're developing a new property of 172 bedrooms that will be ready in the beginning of June. It's a luxurious product at the top end of the market. And where we realized a few years ago that there would be a niche market is the conferencing tourism. And that's what we invested in ultra-modern auditorium that can take up to 6,000 people. And that has been a key driver of our growth over the last 3 years. What I think, apart from Eco Hotel, what is important to realize is that although the private individuals are ready to invest money in the sector, the government has to come and play a role there. And I'm sorry I'm jumping a little bit the gun, but the government has been a little bit dormant into supporting the tourism industry. And although they talk a lot about things, they're not supporting as much with actions. And one of the main things that the Federation of Tourism Associations of Nigeria has been asking the government is the creation of an intervention fund. And they were talking about a fund that would be approximately an initial $4 billion that would be used for infrastructural development, and when foreign investors and even local investors will be able to borrow at reasonably low interest rates, because that's a major problem in Nigeria, the high interest rates, and they will be able to develop tourism. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a combination of private and government initiatives that will grow the sector and will grow the market.
Danny, Michael, let's hit pause on the conversation for now. We're heading into a quick commercial break, but there's more on Invest Africa when we return, so stay tuned.